Further to what the Honourable Mr Hood has just queried, if members of the community were to write to their local member of The Voice, does that mean that their correspondence with that member could be FOI'd?
I think there are many questions. Well, it's capable of having an FO application lodged about that, but of course it will be subject to the usual considerations over FO about the interests of private people and consideration in the normal course of FOI, just as any private individual corresponding has those things determined under the normal course of FO applications.
I'm going to put it at clause 44, standards printed. Those for the question say aye. Against say no. The ayes have it. 49. I'm going to put it that clauses 45 to 48 standards printed. Those for the question say aye. Against say no. The ayes have it. We're at clause 49. The Honourable Mrs Henderson.
Thank you. Due to a duplication, will the Minister be abolishing the South Australian Aboriginal Advisory Council as they'll be advising the government on matters that affect Aboriginal people?
Thank you, Honourable Member, for her question. I've indicated that there will be a number of advisory functions that we think The Voice is better placed to undertake. One of those, as the bill contemplates, is the Aboriginal Lands Parliamentary Standing Committee. I think the Honourable Michelle Lensink had asked about the Commission for Aboriginal Engagement, and we'd indicated that would be the intention that, that we see this as a better mechanism, and certainly the South Australian Aboriginal Advisory Council that was a mechanism much like the Commissioner for Aboriginal Engagement that I can remember being involved in the establishment back when I was a Chief of Staff to a former Minister of Aboriginal Affairs with the abolition of ADSIC. We think The Voice is probably the mechanism rather than that as well to provide that advice, not just to government but to Parliament.
Clause 49, standards printed. Those for the question say aye. Against say no. The ayes have it. We're at clause 50. The Honourable Mrs Henderson.
Could the Minister please advise the body you're asked to provide for so could you please advise why the body is asked to report on themselves and why there wouldn't be an independent review? Section 50 states here that a First Nations person or body appointed by the Minister on the recommendation of the state's First Nations voice. How will the Minister ensure that there is not a clear conflict of interest here?
Attorney.
I think they wouldn't be any different to the general principles of when people are appointed to review certain things. There are statutory reviews required under a whole range of legislation on all sorts of things and all sorts of powers, and it is something that government has to turn their mind to probably every week of the year in terms of review being conducted and making sure the reviewer is an appropriate person given their own interests.
Honourable Mrs Henderson.
Could the Minister advise if it's standard practice, though, for the body that would be reviewed to provide the recommendation of who will be reviewing them?
We don't have a table that compares it with other legislation. However, I would note that this is a unique proposition that is being put forward, and we are conscious and keen to, and I think as the Honourable Michelle Lensink talked about, creating as much scope for the voice to be involved in decisions, and that's what we've tried to reflect in this bill to make sure that the voice themselves are involved in decisions that we're making about the voice.
The Honourable Mrs Henderson.
Does the Minister not acknowledge that that is a potential conflict of interest, that a body who is being reviewed is to provide the recommendation of who will be reviewing them?
I take the Honourable Member for a question. We don't see that as a conflict of interest. It is, again, for the Minister to appoint, but take into account the recommendation.
Okay. I'm going to put it that clause 50 standards printed. Those for the question say aye. Can't say no. The ayes have it. I'm going to put it that clause 51 standards printed. Those for the question say aye. Can't say no. The ayes have it. We're at clause 52. The Honourable Mrs Henderson.
Can the Minister please advise what the threshold of attempting to obstruct is, and can the Minister please provide examples?
Attorney.
Yeah, I'm advised that I don't have particular examples, but I'm advised this is a very common and reasonably standard provision in relation to these sorts of bodies and legislations, and it would be up for, given that it creates an offence, a prosecuting authority, and then for the courts to determine.